This PowerPoint presentation will be evaluating spatial disorientation in military aircraft accidents by Christopher Mackey. The U.S. Army has a problem with spatial disorientation. Spatial disorientation has historically accounts for over 20% of all U.S. Army aviation accidents since 1971. In this presentation, we will introduce new training methods, including computer-based training and spatial disorientation specific flight simulation training. We will also introduce advanced aviation electronics, including enhanced ground proximity warning system and multifunction radar. Fatigue is important to be discussed because the U.S. Army is very successful at reducing aviation accidents related to fatigue. The U.S. Army analyzed the problem, made recommendations, and implemented new policy and law, and was able to successfully mitigate accidents related to fatigue. A report conducted in 1978 identified that 124 aviation accidents between the time frame of 1971 and 1978 was attributed to fatigue. That accounts for 10.5% of all accidents during that time period. The analysis shows that pilots who logged over 90 hours of flight time were 15% more likely to be in an aviation accident. Regulation and policy that came from this report indicates, or made policy, was a current in AR 95-1 states that any pilot who's flown over 120 hours in a 30-day period must be cleared by a flight surgeon before allowed to log any more flight time. And U.S. Army regulations also state that all aviation units must have a crew rest policy. The U.S. Army has made major improvements in safety over the years and continues to reduce aviation accidents. In 1971, there were 556 aviation accidents. In 2013, there was 8. Accident investigation techniques during the 1970s was basically just what happened to the aircraft. Today, because we're using more advanced aircraft, we're able to see what the pilots said using voice data recorders, how the crew interacted, what flight control inputs were made by the pilots, and also the airspeed and attitude of the aircraft during the time of the accident. The culture has changed to where we're more of a learning culture now because we analyze all the data that we get from accidents in order to use that data to mitigate future accidents. Composite risk management is the decision-making process used to mitigate risks associated with hazards that have the potential to injure or kill personnel or otherwise impact mission effectiveness. In the past, the U.S. Army has separated risk into 2 categories: tactical risk and accidental risk. While these 2 areas of concern remain, the primary premise of CRM is that it does not matter where or how the loss occurs, the result is the same: decreased combat power and reduced mission effectiveness. The Army currently uses a 5-step process of identify the hazards, assess the hazards, develop controls and make risk decisions, implement controls, and supervise and evaluate. Spatial disorientation is defined as the individual's inability to determine his or her position, attitude, and motion relative to the surface of the Earth or significant object. This is important because of 2002 to 2011, 31% of all U.S. Army aviation accidents were attributed to spatial disorientation. The human body uses visual, vestibular, and proprioceptive systems to maintain orientation. The visual system is by far the most important, accounting for 80 to 90% of a person's orientation. When a pilot finds himself in a degraded visual environment and the visual system is reduced, the pilot reacts to inaccurate inputs from the proprioceptive and vestibular systems. U.S. Army regulations require weather briefings for all flight. The weather briefing must come from a U.S. military weather briefing facility. U.S. Army regulations also publish minimum weather for aircrew safety due to the high correlation between adverse weather and accident rates. Degraded visual environment is defined as reduced visibility of potentially varying degrees wherein situational awareness and aircraft control cannot be maintained as comprehensively as in normal visual meteorological conditions, potentially leading to loss. Degraded visual environment is important to discuss because of dust landings, which accounts for 56% of all helicopter accidents in Iraq and Afghanistan. The U.S. Army Safety Center states that degraded visual environment and spatial disorientation are linked, describing spatial disorientation as what happens to the pilot, and degraded visual environment is the condition in which it happens. On 15 March 2015, a U.S. Army UH-60 Mike aircraft, whose call sign was Mojo 69, crashed off the coast of Florida. This aircraft had two experienced pilots whose total time was almost 9,000 hours, had an experienced crew of an E-6 and an E-7, and 11 Marine Corps Special Operators in the back. The aircraft took off from the coast of Florida to conduct a night training exercise. The crew encountered degraded visual environment, and 2 minutes and 5 seconds after the aircraft launched, a brand new UH-60 Mike worth $20 million was completely destroyed, and 15 personnel lost their lives. It was concluded that Mojo 69 is a classic example of an aircrew becoming spatially disoriented while flying a systems-intensive aircraft and failing to detect a dangerous flight path. Although aviators may be very experienced, the lack of continuous training regarding spatial disorientation is a major concern. The U.S. Army identifies enhanced training methods and technical solutions are required to properly mitigate spatial disorientation accidents. Enhanced training methods will be identified, including computer-based training and spatial disorientation specific training simulators. Technical solutions will also be identified, including enhanced ground proximity warning system and multifunction radar. The U.S. Army has successfully used computer-based training to standardize aircrew coordination training. Current Army regulations require aircrew coordination be conducted annually and an evaluation be conducted in the individual aircrew training records. The U.S. Army Directorate of Evaluation and Standardization, DES, publishes, updates, and distributes computer-based training for aircrew coordination training. This model could easily be developed for spatial disorientation, including the regulatory requirements for annual training and evaluation be documented on individual training records. Flight simulation training has been extensively researched by the U.S. Air Force and has been shown to be very effective in spatial disorientation training. The SD-specific flight simulators are currently being used by the Pakistan Air Force, the Turkish Air Force, and the People's Liberation Air Force of China. The U.S. Air Force has requested funding for SD-specific simulators for the last 30 years, and each year this request has gone unfunded. Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning System was developed to reduce accidents attributed to spatial disorientation and controlled flight into terrain. A JIPWIS has been on board fixed-wing aircraft for decades, but has been recently produced specifically for helicopters. The helicopter-specific JIPWIS was developed by Sikorsky, the makers of the UH-60 Blackhawk. Today, all U.S. Army fixed-wing aircraft are equipped with a JIPWIS, and currently no U.S. Army helicopters are equipped with a JIPWIS. Aircraft accident data reveals that 60% of U.S. Army aviation accidents are preventable. They include controlled flight into terrain, degraded visual environments, and wire strikes. H.N. Burns was contracted by the U.S. Army to produce LADAR, which was successfully tested in Yuma, Arizona, on a UH-60 Blackhawk. The picture on the top left shows the aircraft hovering in complete brownout conditions. The test revealed that LADAR was successful at controlled flight into terrain, degraded visual environments, and wire strikes. Over 20% of U.S. Army aviation accidents has been contributed to spatial disorientation. Even Donald Rumsfeld stated in 2003 that world-class organizations do not tolerate preventable accidents. In this paper, we have shown that enhanced training methods are available using computer-based training and spatial disorientation specific simulators, and we've also shown that technical solutions are available, including enhanced ground proximity warning system and multifunction LADAR. Training and education along with technical solutions applied to aircraft could reduce spatial disorientation related aviation accidents.